Ladies and gentlemen, it's 5:30. I'd like to call this meeting of the Optional Forms of County Government Study Commission to order. We'll lead with the Pledge of Allegiance. Kurt, if you'll lead us.
Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kurt. Do we have any recommended changes to the agenda? Do we have approval of the agenda? Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the agenda for July 21st, 2020.
Bob, did you just second it?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion and second. Any comment? No. Call for vote. Approve the agenda? Opposed?
Aye.
The agenda is approved.
I'm slow.
Are there any announcements this evening?
Dave, this is Brian Fury.
Yes, Brian. I'm sorry, Brian, what was that?
I'm having a participant at a teleconference tonight, obviously, so just want to let you know.
Yes, of course. We have the June 14th minutes available to everyone. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? Do we have any issues to discuss with the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Kurt has moved. Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Vote, approve the minutes. Opposed? The minutes are approved. I've been asked to give the floor to Kristen for a moment here to give us an update on what she's doing and the reports.
Yeah, Kurt mentioned that a few minutes ago before the meeting, that he knew that we had a little research subcommittee and just wanted to know, what a little bit more about what that was. Basically, we started out with the National Association of Counties and got a list of states that have county governments similar to ours, that have the potential of county governments similar to ours. They all follow Dillon's rule, and they all have the optional forms of government within their statutes. Some of them have gone through the process, some have not. And so now we're reaching out to these counties to talk to officials and find out if they've gone through the process, why they did or didn't, what they came up with and why they did or did not approve it. And also if any leads from them in terms of other counties or any other issues. It's been interesting so far. So far we've reached out to North Carolina, North Dakota, and South Dakota. There are several other states that we can reach out to also. And we'll be giving a full report within a few weeks, but we really need to pull that together. We're kind of at the preliminary stage. I think it's actually kind of fascinating and fun, and I've been, everyone that I've spoken to so far has been very willing to speak and interested in our process and interesting to talk about what their process is and how they landed. And it's a big variety in terms of how they landed. So I think you'll find it interesting.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome.
Dave, this is Brian Fury. I have a comment.
Fire away, Brian.
Good evening, Kristen. Thanks for your update. I just want to let you know that separately, I dug into the periodical literature and text on this, just on the education side, and there's a good book that you might want to consult called Forms of County Government. It was difficult to get a hands on, but I got it on an interlibrary loan, and I've been copying articles that might be germane to the information of this commission. So my one question was whether I could actually share those without violating copyright law. So I need somebody in the county to help me with that. I'm familiar with a case a couple of years ago where the county got sued for somebody infringing copyright. I can't remember how it came out, but it was enough for me to be concerned not to distribute this information. and I've been meaning to follow up with Nancy to see if someone could give me some help in the county, give me some advice.
Nancy, can you check?
Not my forte, this area.
Can you check with legal on that, Nancy? We'll check on that, Bruce. I don't know if you could hear Nancy just then. She'll check on that.
Brian, what's the author's name?
It escapes me at the moment.
Okay.
But I'll dig it out. I can email it to you.
Please do, because I have a book that I got through interlibrary loan, and it's the same sort of thing, so we may have the same book. So, you know, between the two of us, maybe we could pull a little synopsis of it if we can't share the information. Okay? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. We have no old business to go over, so we'll move straight on to the interview. We have tonight Chair Evan Koch of the Democratic Central Committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
If you'd like to give an opening remark.
Well, thank you. Sure, I have an opening remark that you all have in front of you, but I'll just read it into the record. Kootenai County Commissioners and members of the Optional Forms of Government Study Commission, thank you for inviting the Democrats to contribute to this important discussion. Democrats care more than anything else about good government. Whether we talk about federal, state, county, or local government, our concerns are the same. We advocate for a government that's open and accountable and is responsive to change. Good government forms the basis of a fair society. Human rights, good schools, a healthy environment, and a thriving business community all rely on good government. Democrats support your endeavor to re-examine the three-commissioner method that's currently in place in our county. The three-commissioner form of government may have worked well when few people lived here, but the Idaho Business Review states that Coeur d'Alene is the 5th fastest growing metropolitan area in the country. To adapt to rapid growth and to meet the needs of a larger and more diverse population, we should at least consider a more sophisticated and perhaps a different form of government. Our three-commissioner method may be problematic as well, regardless of the county's population. It has no minimum requirement for residency prior to becoming a commissioner. Commissioners only control the power of the purse. They have no direct way to hold their officers accountable for their actions. The commissioners can't speak to one another confidentially because two together make up a quorum, and thus their meeting must be held publicly. There may be other problems as well. And what may be worse, our current form of government with only 3 commissioners is too easy to politicize by either of our 2 major political parties. We're witnessing at North Idaho College how an institution of government deteriorates when one party exerts its own agenda unchecked. Politicization of the NIC Board of Trustees has led to the abuse of power, abuse of the rights of the minority, a lost reputation, and it has placed NIC's accreditation at risk. Democrats hope to protect Kootenai County government from this sort of damage. Democrats therefore look forward to helping you with your investigation. We wish to remain involved. Please keep us in the loop. Thank you very much. So with that, I'll direct your attention to the bullseye right here and take your questions.
Before we start questioning,
No. Microphone. Is his microphone on?
yes,
Okay. It doesn't seem like it's projecting, that's why.
before we start questioning, I would like to ask the audience, please do not disrupt. We treated Brent Regan with dignity. I would ask that we treat Evan Koch with the same dignity.
Treat us with dignity. Don't do like you did last time, sir.
You are here to observe, not to disrupt.
And you are not here to attack the public.
I am not attacking. I'm suggesting that you don't disrupt the business of this organization.
I ask your respect of us also, sir. Will
Bob?
you give it?
Would you like to add a question?
I'm on the pass at this time.
Kristen? Well, we're passing. Go ahead.
Let me think about it.
Okay. Bruce?
I'm just curious, in your opening remarks, you talk about the commissioners can only have the power of the purse and don't have control over other positions within the county. Why do the commissioners have to have that control, you believe?
Thank you for the question. You asked a question that I was going to address in my closing remarks, but I'll get to it right away. I'm not a county commissioner. I'm not a politician. I'm not an administrator. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a politician. I'm not an administrator. I don't speak from the standpoint of somebody who is steeped in policy and administration. I'm a clinician. I have spent the last 40 years of my life working in hospitals and surgery centers and watched as my industry, the healthcare industry, has attempted to reform itself decade after decade after decade without success. And in my observation, it's largely because we've tried to reform healthcare utilization by controlling costs. Whether it's the government or the Navy or the Army or the private insurance business, they've all tried to control the utilization of healthcare by tightening expenditures. And it hasn't worked. Healthcare costs have just ballooned and ballooned year after year. It seems to me that there's a lesson to be learned from that by county governments, local governments, and that is that in order to control the process, in order to control utilization, you have to control the process. You have to be intimately involved in a direct way, not indirectly, a more direct way with the people who are doing the work for you. Does that answer your question?
Well, kind of. I mean, in the sense that you're using healthcare as an example, and I always find that one interesting because rarely when they talk about reforming healthcare do they include doctors in that equation as really trying to drive that process to help deliver, quality healthcare to people. For some reason, it's the bureaucrats that always play a much larger role in that. Just with respect to your opening statement, the other officers are held accountable by the people, obviously, and the commissioner's job is to have the power of the purse string. So, again, your healthcare example, I understand that for healthcare, but this is government, and I'm just trying to really understand why the commissioners, because last week that's what Commissioner Filio said several times. We don't have the control, we don't have the power. And it makes me wonder if there isn't some sort of a power shifting endeavor here that's going on, because that seems to be the theme, is the commissioners need to have more power. But it comes at the expense of another party, which I'm sure you would know who that is, the people. So, well, you're making officers accountable to someone above them. They get a boss as opposed to the constituents. And so part of this is just understanding, why are people, why do you think this? What does that benefit? How do you quantify that benefit, even if you can? I mean, with healthcare, you can quantify that in some way, shape, or form.
I could attempt to respond to that by maybe extending the analogy with healthcare to say that none of us knows, as consumers, let's say we're consumers of healthcare in the same way that we're consumers of county services. Have you ever had surgery? And if so, do you know what that surgery cost? If, for instance, you had a C-section, a cesarean section, or you had your gallbladder out, or everybody in this room is old enough to have had a colonoscopy, do you know what that procedure cost? And I would bet you don't. And that's because there are so very many ways in which healthcare is paid for, and so many middlemen, and the consumer, the patient, doesn't really understand what's going on. In the same way that I think voters don't really understand what's going on. It requires somebody who is intimately involved on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis, who isn't subject to recall or subject to being reelected or replaced every couple of years, to provide some consistency.
When you say going on, what do you mean by that? Like the voter doesn't know what's going on? Are you talking about just the internal workings of an office? Or are you talking about their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the deliverable of their service?
Well,
And let me give you an example. With my health care, which is grandfathered in before Obamacare, after, I think it's $2,000, it's 100% covered. Okay, I was very happy with that. All right, so, I pay for that, and you're right, I don't know how much they charge at the hospital. I think it was actually under the previous presidential administration, they tried to make that public for people who went to the hospital so they could see how much it cost.
yes.
And I think they may have stopped that. I don't know, since the new, I don't know,
I can
but,
speak to that.
yeah, but,
They did try to enact that, but the hospitals won't.
they don't want to do it. They don't want to do
They
it.
won't tell you what
Yeah.
they charge.
That's
And
right.
so as I pointed out, it's very, very difficult to know.
So, but with respect to the citizens, not knowing
Bruce,
what's
try to wrap
going
it
on.
up.
Yeah, with not knowing what's going on in government, what do you mean by that? By not knowing what's going on?
To take just one example, I read the other day, and I don't mean to point the finger at the sheriff's office, but this is just the example that comes to mind. Sheriff's office says that they might be unable to provide coverage to the Hayden City schools. How is the parent of a child at Hayden schools supposed to know why it is and what does it require to have a police officer in their schools? They can't possibly know that.
Well, that's actually something that can be answered, but that's a different discussion. So, but I understand your concern from that perspective. Thank you.
Tamara?
You're welcome. I think that government is complex, and it's really difficult for the garden variety citizen to understand enough about it to really exert the kind of control that is needed.
Tamara?
Thank you for being here. You touched on it a little bit, but I asked Commissioner Duncan this and previous Commissioner Green, what is your opinion on the solution for this? I mean, would you want to see Commissioner Filios and I think Brooks said that they would like to have the 5 part-time commissioners, the county manager, and then have the rest of the other positions now become appointed. What is your opinion on that? Would you agree with that, or would you make tweaks on that?
Thank you for the question. I don't have an opinion on the best form of government. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm not an administrator. I'm not a student of government. If you were to ask me how I think a hospital should be run, I would have plenty of opinions. But as far as county government goes, it would be like asking you, how should I administer anesthesia to you for, how would you like me to administer your anesthetic for your whatever operation? I would be foolish to ask you to tell me how to give your anesthetic.
I actually have a background in medicine and medical, so it probably wouldn't be that foolish. Okay, so following up on that, and I guess kind of following up on Bruce's, were you suggesting that then the county manager would then provide that sense of, I'm trying to just, when you said in here, no direct way to hold officers accountable for their actions, what is your solution for holding them accountable?
Well, nobody is unaccountable when they're in a hierarchical situation. That's been my experience in healthcare. If I make a mistake, it gets reviewed, and I'm disciplined for it. So I guess the same would apply to county government.
In having them be, what, I'm just, let me rephrase this. Your comment that the people aren't aware. Would a county manager, how would having a county manager increase the public's awareness and then therefore people would be more accountable?
I don't think, it's speculation on my part. Like I say, I'm not schooled in this. But I don't think a county manager would necessarily provide information to citizens, which would thereby enable them to hold county officials accountable. I think, in theory, a county administrator would be above county officials and hold them accountable in the same way that a manager would hold employees accountable.
So that would be commissioners, county manager, and then the other officials would, if they're going to be underneath, then that means they would have to be appointed or hired.
I can't speak to that, but presumably.
Okay. And that would help the public how?
I didn't say that it would help the public. I said that it would help the structure. It wouldn't help the public to understand how government works, but in theory, it could help the government to work more efficiently.
Okay, I'm just trying to,
Tamara, please wrap it up.
I will, it's just a clarification because it keeps coming up. The public doesn't know, the public doesn't know, the public doesn't know. So if the public doesn't know, and I'm deferring to you for your opinion, if the public doesn't know, then how do we help the public know? What would allow that to happen, to increase their knowledge, to be more active, or having people more accountable? How, if they don't know right now, so therefore we need to change the government, then how therefore do we do that in order for them to know?
I think informing the public is a problem that is separate and distinct from running the government itself.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. Sherry? Nothing? David?
We've heard a lot from the past interviewees about how the government is working. Some think it works fine, some thinks it does not. But going back to the citizens of the county, just the citizens themselves, what does the average citizen is not getting that a change of government would provide? And the reason I ask that question is a lot of companies we do business with, we don't have a clue of how they actually produce the product they produce. We just simply say, is the product good or the product bad? And that's pretty much it. So most citizens just generally use services of the county. Am I getting my driver's license? Am I getting my tags? Am I getting my tax bill? Am I getting my building permits done? And all those things, you could argue that it's not being done quick enough. But what would, in your world of thinking, in a perfect world, okay, is that how would it be different, no matter what form of government we have? What are the things that are not being done for us, all of us, that would be potentially better for all of us if we operated differently?
I think that's a really good question. And I don't know the answer to that question, Mr. Levine. It would be speculation on my part. I'm sorry. That's not a very good answer, but that's,
Yeah.
I think that might be the role of the commission, and I don't blame you for asking somebody like me, but perhaps the books that the Mr. Cleary was talking about, McCleary was talking about, might help you.
Okay.
Joan?
Sure.
Yeah, in testimony from various ones that we've interviewed, there has been mention that the public may not be vetting the candidates appropriately considering the jobs they're being elected for. And I'd like to understand your view of that and support your answer, please.
Vetting candidates for which offices?
Sorry, any of the elected positions.
Basically, I think as a Democrat that candidates should be vetted for their skills, their knowledge base, and their skill set. and not for their political views. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Kurt?
Your opening statement refers to the growth in the county, and we've heard testimony from previous folks around, obviously, the growth that we're all encountering here. Ada County, which is, I understand it, is the largest county in Idaho, has not seen fit to change their form of government. Is there a reason that suggests to you that we should do something differently than what that county has chosen?
That's a fair question. I thought about that. And I think to say that Ada County runs successfully on a 3-person government and that therefore we should as well is not fair. I made a couple of notes of myself here. Let me just review them. What services does each county provide? Each county provides such things as parks and zoning and fire and police protection, health and welfare. I'm sure you know more about this than I do. But I think it's fair to ask, if I was on your commission, I would want to know, does Ada County spend as much per capita on those services as Kootenai County does, before accepting the argument that it works in Ada County, therefore it should work here? I think if I was on your commission, I would also want to know, what help does Ada County get that maybe Kootenai County doesn't get? And what comes to mind right off the bat is the presence of the state capitol. The state capitol has to, in some way, defray some costs of doing business for Ada County. And that's a benefit that Ada County gets, I should think, that Kootenai County doesn't get from Coeur d'Alene.
But to be honest, you're speculating in that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I couch my answers in terms of a non-administrator, non-politician.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Brian Bushling? Sorry about that, but I wanted to clarify between Bryant and Brian.
It's, the T is always, missed. Good evening. So this may at first blush sound like a trivial question, and I don't mean it to be, because I think the paradigm that we understand the form of government that we have is important to how we ultimately determine the outcome of our study here. And I noticed that, and I'm referring to the elected officials primarily here. You note in your opening statement regarding the commissioners that they have no direct way to holding their officers accountable. And I have a different paradigm. I tend to think of all of the elected officials as, including the commissioners, as being the people's, not belonging to the commissioners. So I'm wondering why you refer to them as there. Do you have a paradigm that makes it more of a hierarchy than all of the officials being somewhat on par with each other?
Fair question. Certainly, ultimately, the people, the voters in a democracy are the ones ultimately in control. They decide who to vote for and who runs their government. But Mr. Bushling, on a day-to-day basis, you can't expect every voter to know how to run the government. They can't know how to run a police department or a library or a waste disposal system. It's much too complex. And that's why we have expertise. That's why we have experts who are hired to do it, in the same way that experts are hired to administer anesthesia.
But doesn't that go to, you're just answering my question by stating the paradigm that you have. Why is it that the elected row officials, prosecutor, sheriff, assessor, belong to the commissioners? That's what I'm asking.
Why do they belong to the commissioners?
In other words, maybe I'm not making myself clear. The question is you use the possessive. They have the commissioners have no direct weight to holding their officers. I didn't know that the elected borough officials were theirs, is what I'm saying.
I see.
So that's the question that I have is, do you see them as being equal, or do you see the commissioners as being the employers of these elected officials?
I see the commissioners as having been elected to run the county government, and therefore I see them as being a step above. But as I said, I'm not a politician. I don't understand how it's intended to work. It may be intended to work differently.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll pass, Bob.
What do you think the main reason for objections? You mentioned earlier that you favored having more than 3 for several reasons. What do you think some of the objections we might be getting for changing to say, let's have 5 commissioners?
Mr. Fish, I don't think I said that I favor having a larger commission or larger county, a greater number of county commissioners. I don't know what's the ideal number.
Well, I'm not, we have a decision to make whether it's 5 or 7, but what would you think the objections for Democrats would have for increasing, just making that change to 5 or 7? What objections would you have?
I see. I don't know that we would object to having 5 or 7. I think that to the extent that it becomes more difficult to politicize a larger number of commissioners, we would tend to favor a larger number. That's not to say we'd want 20 or 30 commissioners, but I should think we would favor a larger number than 3.
Can you think of any objections to having a greater number?
No, I can't.
Okay, thank you.
It seems to solve a couple of problems in my mind. The problem of being able to speak confidentially with 1 or 2 other commissioners. Yeah, in secret,
Please don't interrupt.
confidentially. That's the nature of some political discussions. They have to be confidential. That's how we make decisions in politics. We have confidential discussions, and we discuss issues that sometimes are just too volatile to discuss in a group, and hope to bring people to an agreement that way.
Kristen?
Did you mean to skip Brian, and just since he's remote?
Did I skip over Brian?
Yeah.
Brian, I apologize. Do you have any questions?
Why don't you have people who are there ask questions, and then I'll follow them.
Okay, Brian. Kristen?
I'm going to pass. I think most of the questions have been asked, and I think that you made clear. My purpose here is to hear what people have to offer, and especially if they have something specific in terms of recommending a form, or recommending a for or against. And what I'm hearing is that you seem to be saying you're open to letting the process kind of do its thing, and so I don't really have any specific questions.
That's precisely right. We would like to be a part of this discussion as it evolves, because as it evolves, people from different sides of the table will be brought together in discussions that are both public and private, presumably, and you'll have more information to work with. And the pros and cons of different numbers of commissioners or different forms of county government will become better understood, and we'll be able to come to an agreement.
Bill?
Just one thing, along the same line as Kristen was going. We're inviting professionals in government and who function around government to give us their ideas and suggestions of what may make our government more accountable, more efficient. We aren't looking to say, oh, we're going to change the government, it's not our job. That ultimately is the job of the voters. So we're really just fact-finding is what we're doing here. And hearing what you said about the different commissioners, my understanding, if you have 3 commissioners, obviously 2 can make all the decisions. And that to me is a bit of a detriment, but if there are more commissioners, and this is, I'm asking for your opinion, do more commissioners, you think, allow the people to give more input into the government operation rather than being regulated by a smaller group who are finance campaigns, basically? So it's really just, you think it helps as far as being more representative if there are more people?
Sure, absolutely. In theory, you would think that with more commissioners representing a fewer number of people each, there would be greater opportunity for the people to speak directly to their commissioner and know them personally. How many Kootenai County citizens can say they know Leslie Duncan personally? Not many. But if there were 7 people up there on the dais, there would be more people who knew each commissioner personally.
Thank you, Mr. Cook, appreciate it.
Bruce?
Yes.
Mr. Koch, you mentioned in your opening statement, we are witnessing at North Idaho College how an institution of government deteriorates when one party exerts its own agenda unchecked. What did you mean by exerting its own agenda unchecked?
Exactly. I'm glad you asked that question, and I anticipated it. I brought along a candidate vetting sheet, Mr. Matari, that was meant and designed by the GOP to weed out candidates they might not want running North Idaho College.
Sorry, Evan, could you take the papers out? That microphone is what's used for the listeners.
Sure. I brought along the candidate rating program care of the KCRCC Elections and Diversity Committee. And I'll read it to you if you want, because it asks candidates specifically, do you agree with the Idaho Republican platform, and where might you agree most or least with it? Please explain. Do you have experience as an elected official? Please tell us your activity as a Republican. That's the kind of stuff that we don't need in county and local government.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
Do we have this problem under the current form of government within the county?
I can't speak to that, I don't know.
Okay.
What I'm hoping is that we can avoid that kind of thing in the county government.
Okay. See, excuse me, but right now, under the current form, the current organizational structure of North Idaho College, how many trustees do they have? Is it 5?
I believe so.
And then they have a president, and then they have all these different people that report to the president within the North Idaho College, which is very similar to the structure of government that Commissioner Filios has said was his preference, which was the exact form of structure of government that was proposed in 1997 in the study commission. And if you're telling me that we have problems with parties exerting their own agenda unchecked at North Idaho College using that same exact structure, then could you make the reasonable argument that the current form is less susceptible to that kind of unchecked agenda as opposed to having 5 county commissioners, a county manager, and then a sheriff, a prosecutor, an assessor, a treasurer, all reporting to that county manager? Because if they're going to use this same questionnaire for the Board of Trustees, they're going to use the same questionnaire for the 5 commissioners. Would you not agree with that?
My fear is that they will.
And so that form of government, in your mind, would probably be less ideal than at least the current form where we don't seem to be having that problem.
I don't think it has any bearing on the ideal form of government.
Well,
any form of government is going to have pluses and minuses. 7 commissioners might be less susceptible to politicization than 3.
But 5 trustees are susceptible to politicization.
We've seen it.
Okay, with that form of structure within there, with 5 trustees, a president, and then the people reporting to the president within the North Idaho College.
But you're attributing cause and effect. You're saying that because it's 5 trustees, that it's susceptible to politicization. What I'm saying is that any form of government is susceptible to politicization.
Yes.
Some a little bit more so, and maybe some less so.
Well, and that's what I'm trying
As
to.
I said, I'm not a political science major. I'm not speaking as an expert in.
Well, you brought up North Idaho College as an example, and that's why I'm asking.
You're getting repetitive, please wrap it up.
Well, my point is, I'm just trying to figure out, is there some, in your mind, is there some structure that at least offers less politicalization?
It's a tough word, politicization.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an essay, nobody can say it.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. I can't give you a good answer to that.
Tamara? Sherry? David?
Just wanted to follow up on the last thing. When you said remain involved, the Democratic Party wants to be remain involved. What does that mean? I mean, can you give ideas of how you think that involvement would continue?
Thank you for that question. The Democratic Party is a minority party in this state, as everybody knows. And our country is predicated on respect for the minority. And
Democrats don't respect minorities.
Gentlemen, please. We respected Brent Regan when he was here. Please respect Evan Koch. Sir?
thank you. I'm just trying to refresh my memory here. Give me just a second.
Dave was asking how you thought that the Democrat Party could remain involved.
The party is a minority party, and we don't expect to be granted power in the government that we don't deserve from the vote, that the voters don't give us. But we expect to be respected in the same way that racial minorities and LGBTQ minorities should be respected. In other words, hiring and firing, job opportunities. We drive the same roads that you do. We expect our roads to be plowed in the winter time. We expect to be able to borrow books from the library that aren't censored. We expect to have teachers who are not harassed and are allowed to teach history from an agreed upon, a respected point of view. I think the list could go on and on, Mr. Levine, but the respect for the minority can't be overstated.
Joan?
No more.
Good question.
No questions.
Brian? Brian Clary?
Sure. Thank you for appearing, and I just have a question about your thoughts regarding 5 commissioners, or let's just say more than 3 commissioners, and the accountability, so to speak. And I want to compare that with what we have right now. And let's just have a conversation about that. Because I'm really trying to think through it. You've got 3 commissioners, 6 board officials, all of them elected currently. If you switched to a 5-commissioner board who reported to and were hired by a manager who reports to the board. Wouldn't you say that that is a tremendous shift in power dynamics within the county government to the favor of the commissioners?
No,
Would you agree with me?
no, my understanding, and I got to tell you, it's an understanding. I haven't read the book that you mentioned earlier in our discussion. My understanding is that county commissioners, being elected in even in odd years, provide a oversight, but that the continuity from one decade to the next is provided by the hired county administrator. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, but by having the county manager, or what we would call a commissioner form of management in county government, where that manager is hiring and firing, and the commissioners sit above the manager and deal with long-term planning and policy and the greater thinking of the day, but they don't deal with the day-to-day, the minutia of what's going on in the bureaucracy. They rely on the manager. Wouldn't you say that places a tremendous amount of power in the manager's hands relative to what we have right now, which is diffused power among 6 line elected officials and 3 commissioners who are also elected? That manager now has a lot of power.
I can't.
Do you agree?
I can't say I agree or disagree with that because I don't have the
Okay, that's fair. Now, I want to pick up on your example of right now. There's a concern that because we have 3 commissioners, they can't have private conversations. 2 people constitute the quorum, so that's a public meeting. In a 5-commissioner format or 7-commissioner, let's just stick with 5 to make the numbers easier. 2 could get together. Not a public meeting. They do the greater thinking for the county. Here's what I think the people need. And they say, right, I agree on that. That's not in a public forum. And then one of them says, and now I'm going across the hall to the other commissioner that we're aligned with, and I'm going to have a private conversation with that commissioner. And that's not going to come out either. Now, where does the public have greater transparency in the dynamic I've described for 5, or the one that exists in 3, where it's very inconvenient because the 2 of them get together at the public meeting, they actually can't hide what they're talking about.
Sure, I understand the concern. I understand that concern, but the fact is that people when they cannot air out their differences because they're afraid to say what's really on their mind, never really achieve a clear answer to the problems they face. That's been my experience in meetings over the years. It's best to allow people to express their views freely and without fear. And sometimes that has to happen behind closed doors. That's not to say that they should be allowed to avoid taking hard votes or revealing their true beliefs at some point. And for that reason, I can hear your concern. I think any form of government can be corrupted, and that's a problem that this commission maybe has to confront.
Thank you, Brian. I've asked repeatedly for these people, this audience, to please show respect to our visitors. We showed respect to Brent Regan when he was here. We showed respect to Leslie Duncan when she was here. These are your people. Please show respect to Evan Koch. I'm dismayed by the disrespect that's being shown here.
Will you feel better if I step outside, sir?
You're welcome to stay, please.
If you will feel better.
No, please,
Then I'll stay,
just,
because we need transparency.
please do not interrupt the proceedings. Now, Bob, do you have any more questions? Kristen, no? Phil?
No, I'm good.
Bruce?
No.
Tamara? Are you thinking, or is that a no?
I'm thinking, and again, thank you for coming, because I understand what's going on here, but you said something about the minority being represented, and the government is here to serve people, and the government is to represent the will of the people. But in your statement of the groups, it almost was seeing that for them to be involved, then they're being involved based on their connections, not skill sets. So is that, I just want to know in what manner are you wanting them, because everybody should be involved. I don't care what side of the spectrum you're on. Everybody has a voice. Everybody should have the ability to speak their opinion. That's the First Amendment, and I will fight for that tooth and nail. I may not agree with them. Doesn't matter. My opinion is my opinion, whatever. Theirs is theirs. But we still have the freedom to do that. So in what way are you wanting these groups to be represented through this process?
Let me ask you to clarify that. In what way do I see which groups represented in this process?
The groups that you stipulated, the LGBT, you had a list of them that you put out there.
I'm sorry. Now I understand your question. I believe, and I think most Democrats would agree, that local government should be studiously nonpartisan. Studiously nonpartisan. That means that you leave your personal politics at home, you come in, you do your job, and you get along with people who you don't even know whether they agree or disagree with you. Now, I realize that's an ideal and that we can't possibly attain that ideal, but we should strive for it every day of our work lives. And it's not that difficult to do, Ms. Bateson. It's not that difficult to do because there are enormous areas, a whole range of areas where we agree, whether we're Republican, Democrat, or otherwise. And we need to stress those areas in our county and local government. And I can just reel off a few of them. Everybody wants clean drinking water. Everybody wants clean air. Everybody wants good health care. Everybody wants affordable and accessible education. What's to argue about that? Everybody wants the services that a county government provides. We should be able to leave our personal politics at home and attain that.
Thank you.
Sherry? David? Joan? Kurt?
Nope.
Bryant?
No, thank you.
Brian, we're back to you.
Bill, I do want to thank you for coming, appearing, and answering my questions, and I apologize for not being able to be there in person this evening.
No problem.
No question, Brian?
No follow-up question.
We have made the rounds. Is there anyone who still has a question? Last round, nobody had one. I want to thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next thing on the agenda is to set additional interviews and start scheduling. We have the remaining row officials scheduled, I believe. Nancy? I'm sorry, I can't find my paper on that. We're scheduled through what, August 28th?
No, through the 11th right now, we have, next Wednesday is County Clerk Jim Brannon, Chief Deputy Clerk Jennifer Locke, and Finance Director Dina Darrow.
Turn on their mic over there just so that it's
So yeah, next week is Jim Brannon, Jennifer Locke, and Dina Darrow from our auditors group. Then the following week, we are on Tuesday the 3rd. That will be, let me get this straight,
The coroner.
Prosecutor McHugh and Coroner Warren Keene. And then on the 11th will be Sheriff Robert Norris and Assessor Bela Kovacs. So if you'd like me to start additional meetings after that, you can have that discussion and let me know, and I'll get invitations out
Okay, so that is through the 11th.
through the 11th.
So we need to start looking at who we're going to be bringing in, prioritize so that we know what kind of order we want to put them in, and then start with the invitations on the 18th.
Yeah, I thought we had talked about also having the chief deputies, having a cycle with the chief deputies. I know there's a couple of them that are already lined up for next week. We've got the deputy clerk. Do we want to follow up with the deputy prosecutor, deputy sheriff, deputy coroner, and assessor?
I think that's what we should be talking about now. Do we want to bring chief deputies in? There's a couple of people who recently retired from chief deputies, I believe chief deputy assessor and the treasurer's position, who would be willing to come speak to us. Lori, I'm sorry, I'm dropping their names.
Lori Thomas was the Chief Deputy Treasurer for 15 years. This group had talked about not interviewing the new Chief Deputy Treasurer because she was newer, but then.
You better turn that mic on.
Oh, thank you. You'd think I would know better of all people. Thank you, Kurt. You had talked about not interviewing Jill Smith, the new Chief Deputy Treasurer, but then Steve Matheson recommended because of her experience working in other counties, municipalities that you may want to. So she is on that list. We also had one suggestion this week, one name that is not on your interview list. Someone suggested possibly considering another one of the senior county commissioner from Ada County. So having one or more of those Ada County commissioners might be 1 week to consider, so.
Okay. Shall we start discussing
I guess
who and how we prioritize?
I think getting those folks in we had pretty much talked about that being our next priority. I also think, though, that we should pick a date for a public comment session and start so that the paper can get that out and whoever else wants to promulgate information about the public comment session will have plenty of time to do so. I'm just going to throw out the idea of doing it September 8th, and then we'll fit everyone else around that, because we've got 3 meetings before the 8th that aren't booked yet, and then we've got, obviously, months of meetings following that.
Well, let's take a look first at what we're going to do, is who we're going to bring in, when we want to bring them in, and work in the opening of public comment within that structure.
Okay.
You know, we also have an agenda item to discuss that.
Interviews set in, additional interviewees and schedule, that's our next item on the agenda.
I know, but I'm talking about the public comment. There's an
Yes.
agenda item just to talk about that, and then we could move on after we get this done and just move on to that discussion
Yes.
at that time, I think.
Okay, or not getting a
I'm
lot of...
happy with scheduling the folks you named. I think we could potentially put the Ada County folks out past the public comment or not. It doesn't, I don't think makes a big difference.
Do you want to include Lori Thomas with the current chief deputies, or would you possibly want to talk with her with, like, for example, the previous assessor is on your list as well? I don't know if you'd rather have the formers together or have her with the current chief deputy.
I think that's where we need to go right now in the discussion. As we go to this, looking down what we're talking about here as the list, we have worked our way down. With the exception of Bella Kovacs and Jim Brannon, we've finished the first page.
I think having the formers together makes sense. If there's 2 or 3, how many were there?
We've had problems managing to get people in.
Okay.
So I think what we need to do is
enough out, I
keep
think we'll be
things
okay.
somewhat open to allow people to give us their schedules as well. So if we talk about having for the sake of argument, the chief deputies in, we have 1 of the 6 chief deputies scheduled. We can also bring in the former chief deputy, giving us 7, 1 of them scheduled, 6 more to go. Do we want to set those up for the 18th, 25th, and 3rd of September? Give them the chance to set their schedules on those. Do we have someone else who's a higher priority than those chief deputies? That's what I would like to talk about now. Who do we want to bring in? How do we prioritize who we want to bring in? Some of these people on the list may not have anything really to offer, anything new.
We have all of the currently elected row officials booked on dates.
Yes, that's
So
what
those
Nancy
are
was
set.
just telling
Okay,
us.
then I think going to the chief deputies then makes more sense, and then going to, and within the structure, so Dina Darrow and then Leanna.
Dina's already coming in next week.
Leanna is?
Dina.
I know, but I'm saying Leanna. Am I saying her name right?
She's the BOCC administrative manager.
Yes, I think she would be very helpful in knowing the internal administrative, since that keeps coming up, having that from her perspective, having her follow closely with the others, going after the deputies probably, or filling in a slot if we can't fill somebody in there. I don't think that would cause any kind of issues.
Yeah, I would say on the chief deputies, so 6 row officials. Your first one is your chief deputy clerk, who's already coming in, so that takes us to 5. Allison Knapp just started this week with the assessor's office, so you had talked about, not having her in, although she was an employee for many years prior, so I'll throw that out there. And then I believe Jill Smith and Dan Mattos, the chief deputy treasurer and the undersheriff, very likely to come. I don't know on the chief deputy coroner or the chief deputy prosecutor. I haven't spoken with either of those folks. So you're looking at, if you take that into consideration, 1 to 2 weeks is probably all you'll need for chief deputies. If you don't want to speak to the brand new person, that's up to you.
So that takes us through the end of August, assuming scheduling works.
Does the group want to talk with Allison as a former employee of the county and a new chief deputy, or is she so new?
I'm very interested in hearing from former employees because I think that they might be more comfortable.
Well, but she is the chief deputy now, so she's.
Yeah, do you have?
But I know, I'm, the names are just like
Just making
swirling
sure.
around at the moment. I'm just stating that I would definitely want to hear, in addition to these people, I would like some of the folks who've been in county government for a long time and have seen commissioners come and go, and maybe some of the other row officials come and go, and they've been here. I would like to get that kind of a perspective from a couple of people who would feel comfortable talking.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
What is the status of Dan English? His health problems are resolved?
Dan
Because he was the
English.
former county clerk.
It's been some years since he was clerk.
I know,
Jim Brannon's been in there for a while.
but we're talking about interviewing people that used to work for the county.
Well, I was actually thinking more of the
Right,
lack of a better word,
clerk was an elected position,
line
not a
staff,
worker.
like deputies and that sort of group.
Roger
Because I really,
Satterfield is
I
on Hayden City
really want to
Council.
get to the bottom. I want to hear from the people who do the work. And I say that as someone who's been a lifelong administrator. I counted on all these people, and they had a perspective, and I valued what their perspective was. So I think that anyone who has been, and especially if they've served with, across different commissioners, or different row officers. If they've been there, people come and go. Just like you've said to us, Nancy, that, you know, when new commissioners come in, part of your job is to kind of orient them and go through that whole process. I would like to hear from that perspective. In addition, I don't want to cut out any of these other people necessarily, but I would like to hear that perspective.
So for example, Roger Satterfield, he's on the Hayden City Council. He headed our solid waste department for 28 years. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about? Someone who isn't here now?
Well, no, I was actually thinking of somebody who might have been a deputy before.
Oh,
Well, I think department heads would certainly qualify and
Yeah,
have valuable
I have, it's
perspective.
just a matter of, you know, we're gonna get to a point where we do have to finish this up in a
Sure.
year. I think I actually agree with you. I think the department heads, someone had mentioned the gentleman who runs the airport. I mean, maybe at the point that we bring some of them in, we can bring, you know, 3 or so at a time and try to gain the information that we're looking for.
So what I would ask this group then is I can start working with the chief deputies for those coming weeks. And then would you like any kind of a list maybe from HR about employees, former employees, certain lengths of time they've worked here, certain divisions? If you wanted to think about that, we could certainly have some lists made from HR of whoever this group is interested in speaking with.
One thing I'd like to consider, what new information do we expect from any of these people that we're inviting? I don't want to just use up our time by having people repeat the same thing over and over again.
Agreed.
So I think we need to look seriously when we decide who we're inviting. We should be looking at what new information they can provide.
Kristen, do you have a perspective on what you would look to gain from interviewing such folks?
Well, I guess I'm not sure I guess I'm not sure who Dave is thinking we might not listen to in place of them. I think that we could start having more people come, especially if they've got the same sort, we think they might have the same sort of perspective. Or if they don't, that would be interesting to hear why they don't. I just want to hear from some people who are at the employee level. I just think that's important. Let's just be frank. I can't imagine if I were elected official and you put me there and say, what should we do with your position? I would be saying, well, obviously it should stay exactly the way it is. I wouldn't expect anything else from them, and I wouldn't expect it probably from me, because I would think, I ran for election, I know what I'm doing, I wanted the job, I have the job now, and I feel I'm doing a good job with it. What I want to hear from is the people who are the nuts and bolts, the people who do the work. I'll just give a quick example. During COVID, we know that services shut down. Okay, in order, and things were almost like you'd go into an app and you'd have to schedule something. Well, then if the app doesn't work, heaven help you if you had to try to call anybody, find out how to get the app to work. What I ended up doing is I ended up calling a county commissioner, who then didn't contact the elected official, didn't go to the deputy, went straight to line staff, and boom, I got it done. Those people are valuable, and those are the people who look to, whether they're elected or not elected, to others to give them the guidance, give them, the resources they need, give them the support, and let them do their job. So I truly believe that there's a bureaucracy there that keeps things going, whether people come and go and come and go. And I would just like to hear from some of them. Don't have to hear from all of them. I just think that's a perspective that's valuable. I don't just want to hear from elected officials.
So 2 of the more complex departments, I guess you would say, that report to the county commissioners is the airport and the David Callahan's community services area. Probably if you had to select a department head level people, I would recommend those 2.
Okay.
Because they do have pretty complex
Yeah.
operations.
I mean, David would be a good one.
Yeah.
Director Callahan would be a good one.
Yeah, and Stephen Kierkegaard.
And then I think we already have on the list, we want to talk to HR, the head of HR. So you'll get
I
some of
agree.
those people in, and I think that would definitely satisfy my need for information.
Okay, what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing correctly, is we want to bring in the line officials. We want to bring in the chief deputies. Then we want to bring in a certain number of department heads behind that. Is that agreed? Is that what is being said?
Well, I think we need to be specific with the department heads we want
Yeah.
to bring in, so I
I'm
recommend the
not
airport
arguing that,
director
I'm just trying to
and
get the order of what
Got
we've
it.
been,
Okay.
what we've been talking about.
Perhaps there are more, but those two at minimum.
Is that the order that we're talking about?
Chairman?
Yes.
Make a comment. That is the order I'm hearing, okay? I'm not sure how effective that is, but that is the order. Now, at some point, we're going to have enough understanding of what our current system is and how it works. And I'd like to know if there are other options, why did someone decide on them? Why are they better? No, we have a different system in Kootenai and Coeur d'Alene. Ada County has two different systems than what Ada County has. Boise and Meridian, 2/3 of the population, have a totally different form of government. And I'd like to get some of those people in and say, no, why did you change? And we can start right here. The Post Falls has a different form. But
we've
to
had
go
this-
over and over what we already know, or at some point should know, how the current system is working and where we think there could be an improvement, if any, I think needs to be said. Otherwise, we'll be here for 2 years, but now we don't have the kind of time. We really need to deal with not just what we have, but why other people change that, and how do we deal with it? And does it help us? Because ultimately, we have to somehow, get out the message to the people that, hey, this is what we have, these are some options we think may be better, you make the choice. But I think we need to provide that choice. I don't think we do that, so hearing the same people over and over about Kootenai County.
I don't disagree. I think perhaps people have pointed out there is a world of difference between the county, which is mandated services, and the cities, which are optional services. In light of that, I think maybe the best thing we're going to get as far as people who are using other systems is the systems that Kristen is talking to. This subcommittee has been working on contacting others, I believe you're part of that, and bring in either somebody who is going to be able to Zoom, or just have you bring in reports on what people are saying, depending on what seems to work the best. Okay?
So the only other one I would add would be the Ada County Commissioners into that,
Okay, I'll go back to my question. What new do we expect to get from them?
well, they have a little bit of a different take.
Which Ada County Commissioners are you talking about? Two of them were just elected.
I don't know them, the one that Brent Reagan said that he
Just
would
elected.
absolutely,
He was
he
just
would be able
elected.
to talk. Well, that's fine, we're talking to people here who are just taking positions as well.
So what new information are we going to get from a commissioner who was just elected in another county?
Well, then what new information are we gonna get from people who have just taken positions here, but we're talking to them, we're having them on the list? I mean, if you're talking about semantics on timing, then it doesn't matter. It's that position and their information about that position. If we're not gonna talk about timing, then some of these people who we said have either not been a part of it for, they've been gone, or have just been elected or just been appointed or hired into those positions, then you're essentially saying that they have nothing to offer then either.
I think with the Ada commissioners that we were looking for an understanding of their COO role, for lack of an official term. I don't know what they actually call that person that helps administer the departments that report to the Board of Commissioners. And a perspective probably better gained from somebody who's been in the role more than 6 months of how well their model works.
And that's why I asked Nancy to put on the list is the Kendra Kenyon. Well, she's been there since 2018. So, yeah. So there are 3 county commissioners, 2 of them were elected last November, And exactly what you said is.
So they've been there for a year.
Yeah, and
or
then, but
6
she's
months
been
now, I
there
guess.
probably before the COO. I don't know exactly when it went into effect, but she's been there the longest, so reason I thought she may have more information about before and after.
Okay.
But, yeah, if we're gonna invite Commissioner Beck, then, I thought she would be a good one also to add additional things. The question I think you're asking is, do we need information on the COO and how it's working for Ada County?
It basically, I think we can get that information without having to have somebody come in. Basically, they've got the same form we do, and they've taken like a Nancy position, and they've elevated it, and maybe it's not just yours, but our commissioners now have the ability, as I understand it, to do that.
Correct.
So if we would leave them with 3 commissioners, then my expectation is that they're going to, and some recommendations that we need to hold them accountable in a different way, and we need them to maybe look at that as an option. I think maybe that's something they explore. I don't know that they need us to do that. I think our job is to look at all the different options and come back with, well, we recommend something different, or we don't.
But I think.
But back to what again.
Kurt, Bruce was trying to interrupt.
This individual coming, I would really, I don't know now who said it, but yes, the city government is different from county government, but they do have a different system. And what I'm trying to do, my perspective is to understand, to see what's out there. I mean, I want to open the door and see what's out there. There's going to be probably 98% of it that we're just going to reject. But I don't want to shut the door yet. And I agree to talk to the same people over and over and get the same information. I want new ideas. We can reject them, we can say they won't work here, but I would really like to have some new ideas. I want to be challenged to think about this. I don't want to just kind of rubber stamp something because it's what everybody says that it has been the way that it's been done. Maybe the way that it's been done is the best, but I want to be challenged first. I don't want to just settle and make a decision now. I want to be interviewing people, and so if somebody from, probably being a little bit redundant here, if a city council or a city manager has a perspective to say, okay, here's what I do in my job, I want to know that too. Does that apply to county? It may or may not. But I think it would just open the door a little bit and give us some idea, because as I saw also on the list.
I think we had been planning to talk to some of the cities.
Well, I know, but the way we've been talking now, we haven't gotten to those, and I want to make sure we
we're talking about
are.
very near term. We're talking about August and the beginning of September. Do you want to try to squeeze the cities in before any of the ones?
No, I'm just saying I want to make sure as we're going through this list that we get as much new information as possible. And if we're now honing in on a list, I was looking at the back page, and there are people on the back page like I'm not even as concerned myself with the mayor as I am with maybe council members and managers, to see how they operate, how does it work for them. Not that we can adopt it necessarily, but I just want to understand how it's different. We've got down here the Board of Realtors. We have some of those directors and chairmen. I want some people who would come in with a different perspective, and somebody here said that already too. I agree. I don't want to just keep hearing the same thing.
Bruce, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just very quickly. One of the themes that I've kind of noticed from the very beginning was that, our current form is broken. Our current form of government is broken. And I heard that from the 97 commission member. That's what the report said. The county has grown roughly threefold. Ada County is a great place to at least talk to, because they're a significantly bigger county, and the problems that I'm hearing or that people are saying that we have now should be really significant with a much larger population, 3 commissioners. How do these people even talk to their constituents? 3 commissioners, much bigger dollars. If there is a real problem, it should be there.
It's my understanding, Bruce, it's a bigger county, but it's a smaller county as the county goes. They have the cities down there. It's mainly an urban county with Boise and the others. So when you try to compare it and say Ada's bigger and they would have more problems, Ada's already got this urban environment, and they may actually have a smaller county and have less to deal with than we do.
Well, that's true, and right now, we're watching Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, and Rathdrum. You know, it's very likely that they're gonna end up doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, and so, again, just getting that perspective, I think, would be a little bit new, but I appreciate your time, thank you.
Thank you. Tamara, were you looking for something? Oh, Sherry?
Can I bring us back to the focus of what we're talking about here, which is the lineup of batters at the pitcher at the plate here?
I think that's what we're trying to get to, Brian.
Yeah, okay.
Sherry, comment?
Okay, thank you. I think that, to one of Kristen's point, is if Dan English is well enough, because I understood he was not, wasn't he hospitalized not too long ago? So if he is well enough, I would really like his perspective. He's on the list, and I really would like his perspective because he was a former county clerk, but he is a current city council member. So he has that dichotomy that he has experienced personally. And actually, I would like to make sure that if he can come in, but I don't know based on his health. And then the other aspect is, what was Lori's name to that?
Lori Thomas.
Thomas. Did she work with him at all? Do you know?
Oh, now you're taxing my memory. Well, let's see. Lori was here for 15 years. She just retired this year. So yes, she should have worked because Dan English left here at the end of 2010, I believe, January 2011.
So maybe having them, both of them in together is kind of nice because they know each other too a little bit. That was just a suggestion.
Are you advocating for fitting them into the next 6 weeks? Or just that you want to have them during our data collection phase? Because I thought we were talking about the next roughly 6 weeks, give or take. And then Kristen went into, well, we've got this huge list of people, and I don't think we're foreclosing anybody on the list of candidates, but right now we're trying to focus on prioritizing the next short term, right?
Yeah, I guess I thought from Nancy's list, we were talking getting to the end of August, and this is the middle of July. I thought that was 6 weeks, so I thought we pretty much figured that out, and we were going into what were we going to do in September, October.
I thought Dave was still waiting for concurrence on these first 3 phases.
I'll bring up my comments all over again in 1 month if I need to, okay?
I think we're reasonably settled from the discussion I've been hearing that we're going to bring in the row officials, we're going to bring in the current and perhaps recent deputies, chief deputies. And I think it's appropriate now to bring up, where do we go after that?
Okay.
And that, I believe, is what Kristen and Sherry have been talking about. Who do we want to bring in after we have the chief deputies? Because we have had issues trying to get people scheduled.
Right.
And if we can figure out who we want, let's say for the first couple of weeks of September, they can be invited, they can tell us yes, no, we can make changes as needed. Tonight, we only had Evan Koch because everybody we went to, I'm sorry, I can't make that week.
Yep.
So once again, I bring up the value of, having the airport director and David Callahan here from the Community Services Department as two very complex departments that interact constantly with not only the BOCC, but perhaps the row officials as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're looking at department heads. Are we looking at Lori Thomas in that because she was a recently retired chief deputy, or is she excluded?
I think we can include her in that candidate list.
Okay.
I don't think newness or no longer in service. I mean, we had Mr. Brooks here. He was recently elected too. So I think having as many different perspectives. But again, you don't know the backgrounds of the other people in Ada. But before we get to that, almost like a second, I don't want to say second tier because I don't think it that way, but it kind of goes to the next one. If we've gone through the row officials and we've gone through the deputies and we've gone through maybe the internals with the BOCC, we need to schedule the public comment section or forum.
I think you're right. I would like to put the public comments immediately before our deliberations so that they're fresh in our minds. But I don't know if that's the way the rest of you feel.
I think we still have a lot more interviews to do after the round of officials that we've been discussing. There's a lot more in the list that Kristen's been flipping through there. City, potential outreach to city, potential, I know Brian had listed the possibility of maybe getting some academics to speak to us about their studies in county government. And so I think we've got a fair ways to go still in the interview stage, the data collection stage, and I don't think we should hold public comment until the end of our data collection stage.
Well, that depends on when data collection ends, I think.
Yeah.
If we can end data collection by the middle of September, I think it's reasonable to put public comment there and then to begin deliberations in October. If we cannot end if we can't end the interviews until next January, then I don't think that's reasonable to put public comment out to January.
Okay.
But what I would like to try and do is, as we look at these people and say, what new information can they provide us? I would like to start paring things down so that we can try to get this done by the middle of September.
And then we definitely need to call that list.
Well, would it be
Yes, we would.
helpful to have Nancy update this chart with who's confirmed? And then see who's left? Because I'm kind of confused about all the different people we've talked about. And so if we can see who's confirmed, we'll know exactly the dates that everybody's going to come through next week and then in August.
Nancy can check me on this, but I believe the only people we've confirmed are the row officials.
David, are you asking for also maybe the next tranches of
Yeah, I
what
mean,
we just
I
discussed?
think that we could just take this chart and show who's already scheduled and what's left.
Well, already scheduled or invitations are being extended.
Right, yeah,
to-
exactly, Kurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is that, because I think that there's nothing that stops us, I think, later on as we're deliberating, if we have a question, nothing stops us from getting information from people at that time.
Absolutely.
So again, I agree with Kristen about the fact is, after a while, you're gonna hear the same song from different people. And to hear new songs may be a good thing, just to understand and challenge some of the assumptions, because I don't have a understanding of what other organizations do. So if we could at least get this updated, then commit to continuing the discussion about who we need and why we need them. Again, we're not 100% agreed upon about ADA. There are advantages of having ADA. They're bigger than we are, but does that really matter? It may, if that's the argument for going to 5 commissioners. So it depends on what goes on. I just think we're going around in a circle.
Yep, this is Brian Clary, for the remark.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, we're a study commission, so, study means actually research the thing. There's a couple prongs to that, one of which we've been pursuing, which is listening to people, right? As a colleague of mine once said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so we're listening. And there's another aspect, though, another prong, which is actually doing some research, like in published literature, right? And, I've been doing some of that. But I haven't shared it with you, but the thing is, in the beginning of this, I don't think any of us had our compasses kind of set about, where to start, right? Like how to crack the thing, how to peel the onion, if you will. I think we're feeling our way, and I think we're getting some confidence, if you will, after some of the things we've heard, right? And for those of you in the public, that's one of the reasons why we're not taking public comment, is just like you, we're trying to get up on these issues. We have to get oriented, and that public comment's going to come. not an effort to exclude anyone. It's a matter of listen, hear, get oriented. I think we're getting our groove, and I think we can target people that we want to talk to more effectively. For instance, as to an academic from the University of Idaho that I propose, I would suggest scratching that from the list. If you really want to hear what that academic wants to say, go to the Kootenai County Democrats website and look up the interview that they had of her several months ago about this study commission.
Are you talking about Marky
You'll learn
McBride?
everything that she would have, yeah, you learn everything that she has to offer on this, okay? The independent research that I've done is also informative. I'll share that with you guys, and you make your own conclusions about what that means, okay? But I think we're moving toward a more targeted list of people, and honestly, what I see in those kinds of interviews that I want to get at is this is about power. I mean, if the last interview didn't make this clear to you, I don't know if anybody is asleep or not, but it was plain to me from Commissioner Filios that he feels he doesn't have the necessary power to do what he was elected to do, apparently. I don't understand that, but I think that the interviews need to be targeted toward, is it really in the best interest of the people to propose or recommend, if you will, for a vote or referendum, shifting power in such a dramatic way to either a commissioner executive format or in a lesser degree a commissioner manager format? Is that warranted? And it's about power dynamics. What's not getting done? What are the really messed up things that are just giving the reason for Commissioner Filios and to some extent Commissioner Brooks to agree? Why do they feel that they need such power?
I won't
That's
disagree.
what I want to focus on in these interviews.
I won't disagree with your position. I think a lot of what you're asking should be brought up in the deliberation, though, because that's when we're actually going to sit down and talk about, is the current power structure appropriate? Is there a better way of doing it? You look at and there's an assumption.
From people that we interview should be part of the focus, so that when we get into that deliberation, we at least have information relevant to the discussion.
Right.
Not just speak of it in an abstract way.
There's an assumption being made by many here, both in our audience and here in this commission, that if we go to a commission manager, we're automatically going to hire all of the row officials. Not even the 2012 option did that. We don't have to recommend any of the row officials be hired, or we can recommend certain row officials be hired, or we can recommend all row officials be hired. That's for the discussion that we're going to have when we're actually deliberating.
Surely. And I think that's important to have as part of the discussion about what do you foresee the landscape being if we went in that direction, where all are elected, but there's a manager, not an elected manager, or some in between that. Some are elected, some are not. And try to sort through that inner questions of people. What do they see? How does that work? I think the questions we had put forward kind of get to those permutations.
Yeah, there are permutations, and as you'll remember from your presentation, the commission manager form of government, the manager became the administrator, the commissioners become the legislators and set policy. That does not require any of the row officials to be appointed. And that's an assumption that everyone here is making every time they ask a question. And it's not the case.
I know I'm not making that assumption. Maybe others are.
Actually,
but I take your point.
Actually, Tamara, Bruce, you have been making that assumption because you keep asking the same question over, and that is, when we have a manager, how are all these people going to be appointed by him? How are they going to be hired by him?
Geared towards those people who come in here for interviews, because that's their preference. They even said that was their preference.
No, actually, Evan Koch didn't say that was his preference. He said he didn't have a preference.
And that question that I asked him was geared towards the North Idaho College Board and that structure there, that's all. And that's one of the structures we would be looking at.
My clarification was he said that the public had no way of knowing, and so therefore
there needed to be someone within the structure to be able to help with all that because nobody knew. I was seeking clarification because the point that he made was not clear to me on how the public's gonna be able to know, and he alluded to the fact of having somebody in there. That's why I asked him that, was for clarification. It was not an assumption on my part, and that's why I asked him. I did not say, I assume you think. I was going off his statement.
Then I've been misreading the questions and I apologize.
So, Mr. Chair, it seems like we're a little bit off topic here, off our agenda item.
Yes, we are
Can
getting
we
off it.
circle back around to?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have we covered far enough out? I mean, we've covered the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I'll expand my range now. Do we need to go further or can we take the time, as David suggested, let's look out of our list, who's encompassed within that span of time, and who do we think the most value would be gained from in the remainder of the list? And then revisit this in 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm open to tabling this until next week, assuming that we have agreement that we have the row officials already scheduled. We're going to bring in all of the chief deputies who are willing to come in, including,
Plus the
what
one
was her
recently
name?
retired.
The new one?
Lori Thomas,
Oh, Lori Thomas. Mhm.
who was a chief deputy who ran for the office and retired just this last year after losing the run for the office. What about Mike McDowell? He was the, what was he, assessor?
Former assessor?
He was the assessor. He retired as assessor. His chief deputy replaced him and then died in office, and that's where Bella Kovacs was placed in as the assessor. So Bella is new to the job. Bringing in Mike McDowell might add some balance to the assessor's office.
Did you say Bella's on the 28th?
Bela is on the last day, on the 11th. No, sorry,
18th,
he moved to the 11th.
11th.
11th, yeah.
Bella's with
Sheriff Norris.
With the sheriff.
So we only have 2 that day?
Yes.
And then what was the day that we had 3?
Next week, you have the finance director, the clerk, and the chief deputy clerk.
Okay.
We have one position, 3 people,
That was their request.
the clerk's office.
Okay.
But if you would like, then what I will do is begin the invitations to the chief deputies, the former chief deputy, and the former assessor.
Sounds good.
And at the same time, I will highlight on that list who we have already spoken with, get the dates, that everyone has been invited to or accepted. And then we have everything on there right now in the order that the names were coming in. I can lump those by reason, perhaps, because they are former employees, former electeds, city officials, county officials, that kind of thing, and resend that out. Does that sound helpful?
It does.
That does sound very helpful. And I'm open to Kristen and Joan's suggestion of the airport and planning department, community development heads
Okay.
to have.
Would the group be agreeable to allow Nancy to reach out to them as well, those 2?
I think what we're talking about is department heads.
Right.
Those 2 department heads, I've also heard HR. Is there anyone else?
HR,
Or do
yes,
we
thank you.
need to call the department heads at 3?
At the moment, yeah.
Okay.
And I know this is extra work for you, but would you be willing to update the list then, so next week we can see
Right,
everybody?
I'm
That's what she was
gonna update that list.
I
and-
just wanted to verify.
And you had received, I think, in your original binder, a list of BOCC department heads. If you want any other information as far as how long they've been here, or how many boards they've worked under, if any of that is helpful, let me know and I can add any information you'd like.
Okay.
So just for the group's information, both the airport director and the community services director did their same jobs they're doing here in other places, and I think that perspective would be of interest.
Yeah. So we are set, I believe we are set. I don't, trying to speak for everyone here, but I believe we are set. Row officials, chief deputies, the 2 ex-chief deputy and the ex-assessor, and then the 3 department heads in that order.
Roughly based on their
Assuming they can
availability.
work it. We may have to shift things around a little based on somebody else's schedule, but trying to get it in that way.
Yeah, sounds good.
And then we will table the rest of it until next week, where we will once again address this and try and work our way out past the middle of September, to the middle of September, past the middle of September, whatever we're going to do.
Yeah, I guess it would be helpful, Nancy, I know you're not on the mic right now, but if you could send out the annotated list so that people have a chance to look through it before next week, I think that would help with the conversation next week. Thank you.
For those listening, she has just agreed. Okay. Shall we close the interview schedule and move on to public outreach?
Yes, please.
Okay. Dave, why don't you lead us off on the public outreach, what we call public outreach, communication plan, public comments?
Yeah, I think there are obviously different things, and when I asked this to be an agenda item, it was really based on how I have viewed public comments in my role as in the planning commission, which is there's two reasons why you get public comment. One is because you have something for them to look at and you want comments on a specific code change. And that is usually done before a public hearing and then during a public hearing. But the other reason is also to get information about what they're thinking. And the reason is that when we go and eventually have a recommendation, it's good to know what people are thinking and why they're thinking that way, so that whatever solutions we come up with, we should consider those types of thoughts in our evaluation. And the other reason, coupled with that, is based on lessons learned, is that putting out a roadmap for the public to understand when their comments will be used, how they will be used, is a good thing. Because I sense from the comments we're getting and from other ways that some people in the public may not even understand they're going to have an opportunity to speak. So I think having a meeting in September just to hear comments, not debate anything, make it very clear up front that it's just a listening tour type of thing, and potentially putting out a piece of paper with some frequently asked questions that maybe would go and explain some of the questions we're hearing about how are we formed. We're not communists. We're not trying to take over the government. We're actually doing what the state has allowed us to do, and we've been appointed to do this by the county commissioners. And we're only going to make a recommendation that the citizens will, or maybe not, vote on, depending on what the recommendation is. I think that's another part of it, is that you start to distribute information that is readily available but may not be easily found by people if they don't go to the websites. And the last thing we talked about last time, Dave, is it may be helpful to have comment cards in some of these meetings just for people to fill out a comment. We're not going to respond to the comment. We obviously give it to Nancy. It's part of public comments that'll go on the record, but it allows people the vehicle to go and speak. So I would wholly support what Kurt said about trying to schedule something sometime in September, whatever date it is, just to go out in front and say, this is the day, and we sit here and we listen. And Nancy would have to confirm, but I still think we can limit the amount of time. I know we could limit the amount of time per speaker, but I think we also could limit the amount of time that the comment section will actually be allowed. So we could do 2.5 hours and just say, we're going to limit you to 3 minutes per comment. Here, you could write anything you want and do that. So that's what I wanted to put on the agenda, and again, for us to decide as a team.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I understand what you're saying, Dave, and I think everyone at this table, all 12 of us, if 12 are here, including Brian, agree that public input is essential. I mean, all our meetings are public. Anyone can watch this at home. They can come here and listen. Now, This is not like a zoning commission, nor is like a courtroom situation. The public comes in and says, oh, I support this as the applicant, or, no, I object. I object, maybe it's too many units, too much traffic, whatever. When that presentation is completed, then the group votes and a decision is made. We're not doing that because we're gathering information. In this case, we are both the applicant and the objector, and we're putting all information together and then making it available to the public. And there should be a public meeting, a public hearing, where they can actually provide input. But I think we do need some type of direction. Even if we just had something that explains, in a zoning here, you always have posters and exhibits. An exhibit that shows we are considering really 3 forms of government. And they have different patterns, a different structure to them, slightly different. One's an administrator, one doesn't, one has 2 commissioners, one has 6, whatever the numbers are. But we need to say to people, look, you're going to vote on this. So take a look at this board and tell us, of these things, what do you think is good? What do you prefer? And if you don't, why don't you? I don't want to hear, I don't want it in my neighborhood, which you hear at zoning hearings all the time. Tamara, you've said several times at meetings in the past, whatever we do, the people will vote on. And they're all smart to figure it out and decide what should be the right thing to do. But we need to give them the information. And that's our job right now, is to get that information. When we feel we have the adequate information, then I'd say, let's get as many people in there as we can. In the meantime, they're welcome to send in emails, they're welcome to, watch the meetings, whatever. So they're fully aware of what's going on. But ultimately, it's their decision. It's not us, it's not the zoning board, it's not a jury. It's actually the public that makes that decision.
So you're
And I just think
suggesting
we need to be at the point where we can provide acceptable level of information to the public so they look at it and see what we're doing or the direction that we're going in. And from that, they can say yay or nay. And then ultimately, whatever comes out of this commission goes on to be on the ballot if the commission decides to do it.
I think there's a 3-prong approach to this. I think we have to be careful to understand the difference between a public comment session and a public hearing. They are 2 totally different things. And then there's that education component that at some point I think we need to provide to the public. So I think it's a 3-step process. And I would recommend that we have a public comment session sooner rather than later. After that, I think we should follow up with a more educational presentation to the public, so to speak, with storyboards and that kind of stuff. And then at the end, you're going to call for a public hearing, correct?
So what we're actually going to do is we're going to test the students on the binomial theorem, and then we will start teaching the algebra. I think we need to do our education before we do our public comment. If we're going to educate and public comment, it makes sense to let them know what we have learned and then have them comment on that, rather than have them comment blindly and then go out and say, by the way, you were wrong, that wasn't what we heard.
Well, I think you can do more than one public comment session.
Of course.
And so I don't know,
And I
how do the
don't
rest
think, I
of you
don't
feel?
think we're mandated to have a hearing at the end.
We are mandated to have at least one public hearing.
Here you are.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Brian.
I think there isn't to assume that people in the public are not aware. They are fully able to do their own research. They are fully able to call their elected officials. They could be doing a ton of research and gathering information outside of this because they're not bound by the parameters that we are bound by. So to assume that they can only hear what we're telling them and therefore can only make an understanding based on what we're telling them is assuming that they have no intelligence of their own to be able to go out on their own and doing anything. There's a ton of people who have come into this state in different locales, different levels of government. They could all come and be able to give us. I think the data collection has to include the people because Well, one, we are serving them and it goes to them, but they are a wealth of information and they can get a ton of information that can pass on to us.
Tamara, nobody's denying that.
Well, we're saying we're going to wait till the end and not allow them to say until we have something to give to them.
No.
Why do we have to wait till we have something to give to them?
What I'm suggesting is, what Joan said is, let's take public comment, then let's educate. I'm suggesting that's backward. We need to tell them what we've learned, then we take public comment. If they've learned something that we haven't, they're welcome to bring that to the table.
Good.
My own preference, and that's all this is that they be among the last to give us testimony so that it's fresh in our mind when we go to deliberation.
I think having them, I think it needs to be multiple, kind of what Joan was talking about. And especially if we're going to do, and we kind of touched on this last week, the public comments, we can actually control time in every essence. The public hearing, we have to allow everybody, including online, to be able to speak within the time limit that's been given, but that could take a very long time.
Yes, it will.
So having multiple leading up to the hearing, I think the hearing should be the last one before we go into the recommendation. But we need to have multiple before then for the education purpose, for the data collection purpose. So having one sooner rather than later, and then maybe having one midway, and then maybe having one at the, having the one at the end, I just think it's a better process to incorporate all of that information while we're going through.
So you would propose taking next week, moving Brannon, Darrow, and Locke out and having public comment next week?
That was not my proposal. My proposal was what
You
Kurt
said
was
sooner
listing.
rather than later.
Sooner rather than later is in the next 6 to 8 weeks when someone is not scheduled. Do not put words in my mouth.
And
I did not say that.
again, Dave, the issue is not the date, whether it's next week or next month. The issue is to notify the public.
I agree.
There's going to be a comment.
And to give them plenty of notice on that.
And education there's different levels of education. And we're not a planning commission, I understand that. But we are a board. And what I was probably not articulate enough to say was, I want to hear what they're thinking about the process. And when I was talking about education, I was talking about basic things that are already out there. Why do we exist? Okay, given the state law. How long do we have to get the project done? What are the optional forms of government we're going to consider? How do they go and communicate with us through the county? This is the email. This is whatever, if we have a public comment, whatever those are, is you're going out there and you're hearing, and that is always good to hear the public. And then when we do, we will have to deliberate before we have a public hearing, because you actually have to have a document that goes to the public probably 30 days in advance for comments on that. But I think getting it, all I was trying to do was not to pick a date. I was trying to pick a decision or make a decision that we're going to do it, and we're going to do it not after we have something for them to look at, but something for them to hear, and it could be in September, and it could be whatever date in September. Once we get next week, when Nancy provides us the schedule and who's left over, and we also need to understand from Kristen when maybe the subcommittee would be able to report out, and Brian has some information that he may want to share. That should be part of that. But then just fit it in and go out there and let the Coeur d'Alene Press put it out there and do whatever we have to do, and then put around it exactly what it's going to be. What is the process? It's going to be 2.5, I'm making this up, it's 2.5 hours. It's going to be 3 minutes per speaker. And that's all I was trying to do. And, we may be just to a point where we poll people around the 9 people that can vote and say, how many want to do that, and try to schedule a date next week, figure a date next week, and how many would rather wait until we have a formal document. And I have no idea where that polling would come out.
I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I believe, hang on, Roman, Brian. I believe Kurt made a point that we need to bring in public comment no later than late September.
Yeah, I'd be content doing it sometime before the end of September.
Is that reasonable as far as everyone here is concerned?
Yes.
Okay. When we meet, when we discuss the schedule next week, One of the things we will consider is at what point, once we have some of these other schedules done, at what point in late September we're going to do at least one public comment, if not more. Because if we are not going to be through with the interviews by the end of September,
Right.
then I think I agree, we should bring in public comment at that point. Between now and then, I think we need to look at the communication plan, at what Dave was talking about, educating people as to why we're here, what our options are, and the fact that the public is going to have the final say.
And we might even want to consider the idea of having a public comment every 90 days or something.
If we're going that long on interviews,
Hypothetically.
I would hope not, but if we're going that long on interviews, yeah, I think public comments are going to be another matter. Once we get into deliberation,
we'll figure it out.
Well, public comments are something we'll have to look at that point, whether it makes sense in any given week or not.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
At some point when we've decided, we've deliberated and we've reached some kind of a conclusion, that's when we definitely have to have our public hearing. Put together a document and have a public hearing on it.
Yeah, I think we need a document, not just a decision, yeah.
Yeah. Brian, you wanted to say something?
Sure, I think I'm on board with this plan, designing sometime in September. At that point, we will amass the modicum of information that I think the public will have listened to, and at that point, you know, it's a logical point to invite comments. You know, I think people should know in the meantime, in the public, that you know, you are sending comments in and we are reading them by email.
Yes.
And, you know, these are not being ignored. The public comment is of your comment. Public comment doesn't mean a response needs to be forthcoming. Okay? So we are reading those emails. We appreciate them and we're attentive to them. We're not talking about them amongst ourselves, obviously, because we have to have a public meeting. But logically, in September, I think we will amass enough interviews and information that you will have heard what we've heard, and we want to hear from you. So, you know, to me, I'm on board with this kind of plan, and I think that, you know, most contexts that I work in, you know, it's typically comments is solicited through Federal Register. Once a proposed action by a federal agency out there, a state agency, that's when it's typically solicited in the legal group that I work in. But I think it's important that we have it before that, and that's consistent with what we're doing. And I particularly think, just in human terms, after being locked up for a year, and the kind of anxieties that people have, it's really important. You know, I mean, here we are, a commission that gets appointed. Not everybody knows what our purpose is in the counter rep statutes. They're concerned, they're afraid. We're talking about, you know, recommending a change in government. And so I think it's prudent, you know, listen first, hear the people that are going to testify, amass the information, hear from the public, and then turn to the next chapter, which is our deliberation segment. So I'm on board with our plan.
Thank you, Brian. At this point, are we done discussing this item on the agenda?
And I think Nancy will be able to provide some other ideas about communication plans later on. She just was, I think, waiting to hear how we came out.
Do we need to set up a subcommittee to set up a communication plan?
Nancy, do you want that subcommittee? There you go.
Here she comes.
It's like the Wizard of Oz coming out behind the curtain.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, huh?
I can prepare, I got notes. So, you know, communications, it's up to this group on how you want to proceed with that. We do have a legal opinion request in about the parameters. What can this group do? What shouldn't this group do? So as soon as we get that back, I'll let you know. we had kind of talked about the communications plan template. My recommendation at this point would be, first of all, for this just group, for me to get a clear idea from the group on what you want. Do you want some kind of a coordinated communications effort beyond the interviews? If so, what I would look at, I would probably send out a questionnaire to this group and to have you think about 5 primary points. Number 1, what is the objective of the communications plan? It should tie to the mandate of this group. So, kind of your who, what, where, why, when. We know we want to talk to residents, to voters, but the what and the why. Is this to talk about the options available? Is it to give them information? Is it to receive information? I think that's the first step in trying to decide how you want to move forward with communication, is what is it you're trying to achieve, kind of the SMART goals. Do we want to tell them where to find information? Do we want to do kind of a blast if it's outward facing? Here is how you can attend our meetings. Here's where to get information. Revamp the website a little, those kind of things. The when, how long. A lot of people I have come to realize, I ran into someone just last week who said, oh, I missed that meeting. What was the outcome? What did they decide? Like, oh, no. no. And so I kind of made a mental note and went, okay, this is what people don't know. Who's our target audience? We kind of talked a little bit about the old media and new media audiences. So if we're going to do any kind of communication, I personally would say you would want to look at it twofold, kind of two simultaneous as far as your methods you're using. And then how do you want to measure whether or not you're being successful? You'd want to think about that. Is it, we want to drive more people to the website? Do we want to start doing surveys? Do we want to see if we could put a place on the website that really invited questions to this group and highlight it? And then your calendar. When would we want to use the various tools? Because as you talked about tonight with public comment, I think that there were some great arguments made here that you're interviewing a lot of people, but have you really interviewed the public? Do you educate them before you interview them? Do you interview them first to find out what you need to educate them on? Those are both great arguments. So my first step, if you wanted to move forward with looking deeper at communication, would be to send these questions to you, let you think about it. I don't think we'll have time next week, but possibly the following to do some follow-up on it. And then we could move into this sort of question of what are you comfortable with? Because there are a lot of tools at our disposal. If this is, we want to drive information in from the public, what do you want to know? What are you learning from watching these meetings? What are we not asking you would like us to? That is maybe surveys or pushing a Q&A box onto the website, starting to build the Q&As. Is it that you want to push information out? In which case we're looking at, we talked before about potentially doing podcasts. We could go around and each of you could commit to a week that after the meeting you could sit down on the podcast and just do so what'd you learn this week? So how do you think the process is going? Let the public get to know who you are, why you're here. Later, they're going to trust your recommendation more, in my opinion, if they trust you, if they know you as people, if they know why you're on this group. We're hearing a lot of, they were chosen because the commissioners want the people who are going to do what they want to do. Well, I'll tell you, I work for 3 great commissioners, and I think all of you know that their main priority is, if we're going to do this, let's put on some people who are really good at studying, because it's a study commission. And so maybe the public needs to hear, why you thought you'd be a good study person. So those would be the questions I would ask of this group is it outward facing? Is it inward facing? Is it both? What are the objectives? And then once we kind of hone in those answers and get our SMART goals, I think we can build a plan. And I've talked a little bit, the communications director at Lewis Clark College is in to help us with some guidance if we need it. But I kind of ran this by him, and then he thinks it's a good solid point if this group wants to look at communication, and that is up to you.
Nancy, I have a question. You mentioned going to county legal. Does that include the public hearing segment for this committee, or was it more the plan, a total communication plan that they're
The total
reviewing?
communication, because there had been some questions with the group. Statute doesn't say you have to, statute doesn't really address the education or how you're supposed to interact. All it says is you have to have a public hearing. So, and you guys had sort of had that conversation about, well, there are certain things, especially municipalities, you can't go sell an idea. You can give information. So what are those parameters that you have to stay within? So it was just sort of, what can they do, what can't they do, what should they do, if anything? And then the other question that was asked at the same time was, you have 1 year for this commission. When's a year? Is that from the time that the resolution was passed? Is that as of your first meeting? So legal is looking at both of those questions right now.
Thank you.
So a question, I liked Dave's suggestion of having some sort of a information sheet, if you like, as a precursor to, or an accompaniment to our public comment session, with the idea being, presumably, Dave, that we can address some of the concerns through that info sheet and not have to have people get up and make a comment of, I object that you're taking all our elected officials away from us. And I object that I'm not going to get to vote on it because the people will vote on it. In the short term, is it worth us trying to brainstorm a list of topics based on the feedback we've gotten and that we've heard in the community, et cetera, that we should try to cover in such a sheet, presumably following sort of resume guidelines that it should be 1 page or at max front and back?
I like what Nancy proposed, and that is her sending that questions out to the group. And that allows us to format our discussion of this communication plan. What you're talking about right now is a specific aspect of the
It's a very
formatted
tactical,
communication
short-term
plan.
focus, yes.
And I think it would help if Nancy were to send those questions out, let us format what we want to do in a communication plan. I think what you're suggesting is perfect for an FAQ on the website. Yes, these are things that people have commented on, people have asked about or complained about, or whatever you want to call it. And here we actually are legally supported.
Right.
There is a set of statutes. It is in the Idaho State Constitution. We are here for this purpose. We are not here to mandate anything. We're here to recommend to the county commissioners. The county commissioners have committed, 2 of them at least have committed to putting it on the ballot, whatever we recommend. And then it goes to the voters, and the voters have their say, one way or the other.
And I think Kurt made a good point. We've seen enough of the questions repeated, I think, in those emails, that to start building an FAQ is a good first step, and one that would probably be pretty easy to take because those questions are being repeated, so let's address them. So I can start to kind of put those together as well.
And then I would recommend it not just go to the website, I think it needs to go into the paper, because we see a lot of comments in the paper, and it's really obvious that people don't know what we're doing.
So how do we get something like that into the paper, I guess would be a question for you, since you've got experience.
Yeah, we can talk with the press, and again, old media, new media, if we're gonna do that, the FAQ should be on the website.
Yep.
And a social media push, Facebook, Nextdoor, that we can get those Q&As, FAQs out, and we can work with the paper as far as what that might look like for them. Yeah, they may prefer something.
The press seems to be, sorry Nancy, you didn't finish, I'm talking over you. So let me know when you're done.
Oh, okay, right now, all I was gonna say, I agree with you, the press has been kind of a partner in this, I think, with your group. And so they might prefer something like interviewing a member to ask those questions or how you came up with answers or something, but that'll be up to them, but we can certainly do that outreach.
I think when we talk about this, I'd like to kind of table this also for next week.
Sure.
But.
Or
when
maybe
we-
2 weeks
Or
out,
maybe
as
two,
Nancy
depending.
suggested, yeah.
But Nancy's going to send out the
But Nancy's
survey,
going to
that's
send
what
out the
I've heard,
questions.
and then we'll respond back to Nancy and then put it on the agenda for,
I don't know that we need to respond back to Nancy per se. She's
Well,
going to
with
send out the
sur-
questions, and then we're going to discuss that as the basis for what we're going to set up as a communication plan, I understand.
I think we can get the questions out. I mean, if there's something simple we can answer now, you don't want to have discussions via email. However, administrative's fine. If we have questions such as, will we, after this, will we hire all elected officials? Well, the answer is clearly, we don't know yet. We don't know what your recommendation is. So some of those, I think, will be very easy, and we can do that via email to say, yes, we all agree on that this is an obvious answer, go with that one. Any of those questions that how we answer this group may want to discuss, we can put on a future agenda, but we can start that process of building.
yeah, I was actually getting back to the survey that she was talking about sending out. Are we sending out that survey to us? That is going to ask about what the
Yes.
communication plan is.
Yes, I will put down the
Okay.
questions I asked
All right.
tonight and let you start thinking about that.
Yeah.
Is that,
Brian was trying to say something.
Brian, you wanted to say something?
I'm in general agreement. I think that it's important to have a web communications strategy that is already underway. There are some Q&As up on the website that are helpful. I think we can float this out. Number two, in terms of engaging the press, I think that is important to carry over into the press those Q&As. To the degree we still allow that, I know press space costs money, but I think it'd be good, that's additional outreach to the public. I also think prior to taking the public comment sometime in December, it would be useful to kind of go through some of that Q&A at a meeting and just say, here are some of the common questions that we've seen. Let us set a baseline here on which people can then make their comments. Certainly you're welcome to comment about anything, but let's just get a baseline understanding of what it is we're doing here. We're not redefining government, that's not our role. We are looking, studying, examining and analyzing, and recommending among a number of limited options under Idaho code. And that's it. And you get to vote on it if the commissioners decide to put it on the ballot. And I think that's important to communicate to people prior to comment. Because not everybody can pay attention 24/7 to this stuff. I think it's really important for them to kind of have that baseline through the web, through the press, and also through our commission meeting prior to opening public comment. Because I think people can then have a sense of, okay, this is what they're about. Now I get it, and let me target my comments specific to that.
Good comments.
Are we generally in agreement then on this?
Yes.
Okay. That basically is the end of our agenda tonight.
Could I, I'm sorry.
Fire away.
Mr. Chairman, Brian sent out something to all of us, and we probably need to put that on the agenda for next week. He had a little, an email, and then the questions that might go to the individuals that we're going to interview. So we need to.
Actually, I don't think we have time for that next week. We're going to have to do that this week because we have one of the row officials in next week.
Right.
Can we do it this week we can discuss it, but can we act on it when it's not?
Well,
It's not making it's not really making a decision, it's just
Okay.
providing informative.
Actually, I think we're merely confirming something we
All right,
decided last week.
It is.
I'm
Yeah,
comfortable.
sure.
We had a discussion of this.
I just put it in a letter format.
Right. We discussed the questions that we want to provide to the row officials. I believe the only thing that's not what we discussed last week is that Brian suggested a cover letter, and I don't have any issues with that. Anyone do that? Anyone have an issue? So
Looks good.
basically, we're agreed that we are going to implement last week's decision and Brian's email.
Okay.
If everyone would just
So
read over.
Kristen, one question I had is I consolidated some of your questions from what is now section 2, or what was then section 2 after our edits last week, up into kind of a section 1, like uniform questions. Are you okay with that? I tried to pull and be faithful to what you were getting at. I just pulled those in.
Actually, I sent you an email, and perhaps you haven't seen it, that thanked you for all your efforts on, and that I appreciated what you did in terms of making it more succinct. So I apologize if you didn't get that. I sent it to you probably mid-afternoon.
Sorry, I hadn't checked. So,
That's okay.
I just wanted to be faithful to what you're trying to get at.
Well, I appreciate your asking, but yeah, I like what you did, and I thank you for your efforts.
So my plan would be probably, those went out. If everyone has had a chance to look at them, I'm ready to send them to the row officials as soon as I get the cover letter. Other than that, if you want to look at them, I'm thinking maybe Friday morning, gives you tomorrow to do one last look, make sure it says everything you wanted to, get the cover letter. Is Brian doing the cover?
Brian has.
It's already there.
Has sent a cover letter,
Okay.
a proposed cover letter in his email.
Okay, so, yeah, probably late tomorrow afternoon then.
So I had one grammatical correction. I forgot to put a word in that makes the sentence
Yes.
complete.
Yes.
I'll take care of that tonight and send it to you and everybody else on the commission. It's not anything substantive, it's just a word missing. And I'll get that over to you right after the meeting, and we'll be prepared to distribute.
Okay, I have to ask, we already discussed this last week, we were merely confirming it. Does anyone feel the need to wait another day before it's sent out?
They're all good?
Nancy, I believe we're ready to go.
Okay, as soon as I have that, the cover letter with the correction, I will send that out to the row officials. Thank you.
Thank you. Move to adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. We have a second. Anybody object? Vote for, in favor?
Here.
We are adjourned.
7:47. Thank you. Have a good night.
I apologize, but we're not taking.